The Lions did exactly what I said they would do in my season preview last year. And even with a few bumps in the road going into their goal, they did it. They did exactly what I thought they would do and clinched their first ever NFC North division title in franchise history and the first overall division title in over 30 years. But they managed to do more than just that. They not only got to host one playoff game, but 2 playoff games. And not only that, they got to go to their first ever NFC championship game in over 30 years. And they were almost there. They almost got to a sudden and unexpected Super Bowl appearance against the Kansas City Chiefs. But they just let it slip away. They let it slip out of their fingers. And this is a phrase that people are, Lions fans are going to hate you for. The Lions gonna Lions in that NFC title game against the 49ers. They had a 24-7 halftime lead, but they just made one too many aggressive mistakes and let it slip away. So they blew that 24-7 halftime lead and they lost. They just let it slip through the cracks. So when you look at the Lions going into this season, obviously you know what you have to do. You got to get back to the playoffs. You got to get back to the NFC Championship game. And you win the damn thing to make it to your first ever Super Bowl. But I mean, obviously, that's easier said than done. It's harder to make it back than it is to make an unexpected run. So looking at some of their key offseason events for the Lions, honestly, very quiet, other than this one particular thing. And that was re-signing Jared Goff to this big, fat contract extension. A 4-year contract extension that's worth a shit ton of money. So, interestingly, we'll talk about Jared Goff in a little bit later, but I mean, hell, what he's done for the last 2 years for the Lions, I mean, he's more than earned it. I mean, 2021, when he first came on, there was a bit of a rough patch as he was trying to learn and didn't have much of a supporting cast. But these last 2 years, I feel like he certainly earned it. Now it's just a matter of whether he can maintain that contract. So looking at some of their offseason moves for the Lions, they lost a few key players on both sides of the ball, like CJ Gardner-Johnson went back to the Eagles. An interesting choice, per se, for CJ, considering all the shit talk that he had after he left. But then he decided to hug it out with his old and / new team. I don't know. They also lost one of their key guards on the offensive line, Jonah Jackson, to the LA Rams. So they had to figure out who's going to replace him. They also lost one of their kind of key depth receivers, Josh Reynolds, to the Denver Broncos late. And they released Cam Sutton, but he wasn't really performing up to snuff anyway. So it was a mixed bag when it comes to losses, but they tried to address it with a few key additions, like getting corner Carlton Davis from the Bucs via trade in return for a 3rd-round pick from this year's draft, and Amik Robertson from the Raiders. So you addressed the weakest part of why you lost that NFC title game against the 49ers, and probably an overall season-long weakness, which was the secondary, because you lost like guys like Emmanuel Mosley to a preseason Achilles injury. So yeah, you were pretty much exposed in the secondary. So now you go add these corners like Davis and Amik Robertson, and now at least you have some depth in like key potential starting depth in your secondary. And then you get a guard Kevin Zeitler from the Baltimore Ravens to replace Jonah Jackson. So at least that one the best offensive lines in the NFL. You at least now you're set again. But they're not done in the draft, because with the draft for the Lions, I felt like there wasn't a whole lot to address for this team other than that secondary. And pretty much for the most part, they went and addressed that secondary because they got corners everywhere. Like Terrion Arnold from Alabama and Ernest Rakestraw Jr. from Missouri. So that secondary group is going to be deep. And I hope it's pretty much a more balanced team for the Lions. They also went to get a defensive tackle like Mickey Wingo from LSU, because that defensive line outside of Agent Hutchinson was a little lacking. It was a little lacking in terms. So for the Lions, they upgraded their secondary with those draft acquisitions and the trade corner. So as long as they can perform up to snuff, with these additions, and they continue to scheme up some good defensive plays, then I feel like these Lions secondary will be much better, at least on paper, than what we saw these last 2 years. And then going back to Jared Goff, well, I do think he's done better in the last 2 years. It's still a little bit of a gamble. It's still a little bit of a gamble for the Lions to give him this big fat contract extension, considering that sometimes he can be like pretty bad in some games, like pretty bad. Makes some questionable decisions with the football, turn it over, like give the ball away. So he can have those game breaking like losses for the Lions. Some of that was evident last year, but I mean, like I said, he earned it, but it remains to be seen if he can keep up that momentum going into this year. I mean, it's kind of the reason why they have Hendon Hooker, right? I don't know. Either way, looking at some of the Lions' key games this season, they have a lot. Like literally, they have a tough schedule, and there's a lot of tough teams, whether it's in or out of the division. And it all starts in week 1 when you literally play the first 2 teams that you faced in the playoffs: the LA Rams and the Tampa Bay Bucks at home. Like literally, that's their first 2 teams that they play at home. Wow. The NFL really decided to give them the rematch gauntlet right away. And then you week 6 later on, you go on to face the Dallas Cowboys in a Monday night rematch from last year. But this one's not Monday night, I don't believe. But that was a very controversial one, but also a fun one late last year. And then week 9, you go to Green Bay to take on the Packers in a key division game. And then much later in the season, you go on to face Caleb Williams and the Bears on Thanksgiving at home. And then probably another key pivotal Monday night game late in the season that could determine potential seeding in the playoffs. That's if any of these teams make the playoffs. The San Francisco 49ers on the road. So interesting things for these Lions this season. And some of these things to consider for the Lions that, going into 2024 is what their mindset's going to be. Like, how are they going to approach these games? Especially their head coach, Dan Campbell. Because when you look at certain game situations for the Lions, especially on 4th down, they really were aggressive on 4th down. And some of it for the most part, it paid off. But then other times, like in the NFC Title Game or in like that game against that road game against the Bears, it didn't pay off so well. So I feel like Dan Campbell's aggressive mindset of, we need to get it on every down, especially 4th down. We're gonna go on 4th down, even when we're in our own territory. It backfires. It backfires sometimes, and again, it especially backfired when you're still kind of too far away from the 49ers end zone, and then you decide to go for it from a questionable 4th down rather than kick a field goal, and then you don't make it, and that triggered the comeback for them. So is Dan Campbell's mindset going to be a little different? I mean, he doesn't necessarily have to change it a whole bunch, but are you going to have a more balanced approach when it comes to your aggressive mindset of, we're going to keep going for it on 4th down, or are we going to take things a little bit more slow, per se? So that's my biggest question for them. And then, of course, going back to Jared Goff, how is he going to follow up his very strong 2023? Again, very, very strong 2023, but can you maintain that in 2024? So one of the best teams in the NFL, in the Lions, they got stronger. Better secondary. I mean, the offensive line, still one of the best in the league, at least going into this year. I mean, still a very good quarterback in Jared Goff. It's just a matter of maintaining that. And while I do think they do have some tough opponents on the docket, they still have a very good chance to repeat as NFC North champions. And again, the only thing is, well, what can they learn from their past mistakes of that fateful January in Santa Clara? And if they can go far again in the playoffs.